I would like to announce the moderator for our next panelist and invite the panelists up to the table. Moderator David Samuelson is Executive Vice President and Director of Games and Augmented Reality at Pearson. He is responsible for games and strategy as part of the digital strategy team for Pearson, and I'll let him do introductions for himself.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. One of my favorite quotes is from Sandra Day O'Connor, who started iCivics, which is a game site to teach kids civics. She said, "If a child can't learn the way we teach, perhaps we should teach the way they learn." And I think Mr. Pai is a great example of that. So I'm really inspired by his story, by that story. I'm going to start, before the panelists introduce themselves. We have a great panel today. We're talking about really gamification of education. And those of you who don't know Pearson, Pearson is a global media learning company. Pearson owns Penguin and the Financial Times, based in London. But its largest business is education, both testing and resources and technology. And my job is really looking across all of those businesses and across the world at what the games industry and what some new technologies can do to enhance the core work that we do, which is really serving schools and responding to education entities around the world. So one of the reasons that I have this job in games is in my background. Before I came to Pearson in 1997, I worked for a company called Living Books, and before that, a company called MEC. And those of you who have played the Oregon Trail would maybe remember the MEC logo. It's one of the most famous games. And the Oregon Trail is actually a 40-year-old product. Started out on the mainframes in Minnesota, when Minnesota, which is where Mr. Pai's from, had an initiative at the state level to bring computers into the classroom, and the Oregon Trail was one of those projects. So there was an industry making learning games for schools. That industry sort of disappeared in the early 2000s. But I was from that industry, so in a way I'm sort of coming back to the future in some ways. But I think there's definitely a tipping point happening in education around this kind of work, the work that you guys are doing and that we're thinking about and talking about today. It's a big industry. The games industry is a big industry. It's bigger than music and movie industry globally. And so a lot of money's being spent on making games and entertaining. And the social and mobile growth in games, the platforms now with phones and with smartphones as game devices, and with Facebook being a game platform, there's quite an explosion. Games are everywhere in our life now, which is probably why we're having a conference around gamification. So there's multiple platforms, and I think it touches sort of all aspects of our population. But another really interesting demographic shift is that there are more women gamers now than there have been in the past. You think of sort of the 17-year-old boy in his bedroom with his Xbox. Because of some of these other trends, the social trends, the mobile trends, women are a larger gaming demographic than 17-year-old boys and younger, according to the ESA, Entertainment Software Association, which is the game industry association. And women tend to be the chief education officer at home. Moms generally are responsible for the kinds of informal education that happens at home. So I think that's significant. And also, most teachers are women. It's a big demographic there. And I think another trend, which is evident from the Oregon Trail applause, is that you digital natives, those of you who grew up with technology in your lives, you don't remember anything but the kinds of technology that included playing games. You are used to this idea of using games to learn. So I think that's important. And those are, digital natives are the teachers, the politicians, the entrepreneurs. And so that, I think, is adding to the tipping point And we've got decades of research about games and learning. So the topic of this panel is really to talk about this idea of gamifying education, and what are we doing there, and how do we do it, and is it reasonable to think that that's a good idea or not? So we have a great panel lined up today, and so I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves, and if you could also respond sort of in your introduction to what you think is important about gamifying education, or what's your perspective about this idea of gamification of education. So why don't we start on the end and come this way?
I'm Mike Fulkerson. I'm the CTO at Rosetta Stone, the language learning software company. Rosetta Stone is almost 20 years old. We've had the same basic pedagogy, the same basic way to teach for that 20 years. One of the things that we certainly have noticed is the core Rosetta Stone method 20 years ago, when a 14-year-old used it, would say it felt like a game. They would sit there and they on their computer, there's little visual puzzles that every screen they're sort of clicking, and it felt like it was a game. Today, no 14-year-old would say Rosetta Stone feels like a game. So we've been looking. We believe that there's a lot of power in making it fun, making it feel entertaining. So we've been working on gamification, both just from making the games better, but then also exploiting the other game dynamics and mechanisms in our products for education. We've been doing tests with some of the more innovative schools in the country around some new stuff which is not on the market yet, in ways to add more gamification techniques. And what we see overwhelmingly is that the kids like it. Right? They come back and they say, they like playing games. They like solo games. They like playing multiplayer games. Even if it's only a 5-minute experience out of an hour, that 5 minutes is useful, and they feel good about the experience. So I think we're very excited about gamification and its prospects for our products, and I think for education in general. Oh, and I'm 20 years old, by the way.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, and I'm 20 years old, too. My name is Anthony Zolezzi. I'm the creative director with Greenopolis. And for the last 25 years, I've been trying to be an educator of sustainability. And on this panel, I reflected back, and I closed my eyes on the plane and said, what is a perspective here? And for some reason, I went back to Sacred Heart Academy, Ocean Beach, California, 4th grade, Sister Joselita, hitting my knuckles with a wooden ruler because I did not do my homework. I had no papers. And I thought about that, and I said, wow, that's my perspective of education, and I've been doing the same damn thing for 25 years when it comes to sustainability. All I've been doing is guilt and shaming people into changing their behavior, thinking that if I guilt and shame my son into turning off a light bulb, he'll do it. Or thinking if I guilt and shame everybody, that they'll change their behavior. And you know what? My perspective is guilt and shame, and I'm so glad to be here, has to become now fun and fame. And if we can make this fun, we can make a difference. So I think my perspective after beating my head against the wall all these years is I'm so glad to be around here, not only just all the young energy, but I really believe if we can start rewarding people, we can start making them feel good about their actions, they'll make more of them. And this is where sustainability needs to go. It's where we're going with Greenopolis. We're rewarding people for recycling in multiple ways, and I believe that by this fun and fame versus guilt and shame, we can make a difference.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Anthony. Matt.
Very cool. There we go. So hi, I'm Matt Shobe. I'm Chief Design Officer with BigDoor. We're a gamification platform provider. We provide web services API that allows any website or any web-connected technology to add a gamification layer, track points, achievements, and add gamification to your site. And I sort of, and a little more about my background. My background, I've spent a lot of time working on publisher platforms and services for distributing content on the web. I worked on AdSense and some of the other ad technology at Google prior to BigDoor. Was a co-founder of a company called FeedBurner. been involved a lot in watching how content is created online, how it's distributed, how it's consumed, and how influence it finds its way out there, and how influencers make things happen. And I've been involved in a series of startups prior to that. So I guess I have kind of an entrepreneurial color to everything I look at. And as I look at BigDoor and some of the education-focused things that we've been paying attention to, we don't have any big education implementations to talk about yet, but what we have seen a lot of increasingly are inbound registrations. We have a self-serve platform. You can sign up and start tinkering with it yourself right away. Increasing number of EDU registrations. We've also had a couple of psychology researchers and someone from the Human Centered Design and Engineering program at the University of Washington, we're a Seattle-based company, come in and interview us about what are you seeing in terms of game dynamics and game mechanics in industry, and how are people trying to use these game mechanics to change behavior, and what's successful and what isn't. And we're also, what was one of the other examples I was thinking of? Even got an inquiry from NASA at one point, and although this, they do a lot of educational outreach, I'm not exactly sure where they're gonna go with this at this point, but hopefully it's some sort of achievement unlocked thing to do with Mars at some point. And one conversation I had earlier this year was with a fellow working in distance learning at NC State University, and what they were trying to do was not so much gamify his conversation wasn't about gamifying the in-classroom experience, but some of the infrastructure around education there, the surface area of the classes and available opportunities at the university. They wanted to see what they could do from a sort of a registration and curriculum management perspective. We brainstormed some ideas of like earning credits for taking classes in departments that were a little further off the beaten path of your core track, your core major, and as you earn those credits, you might be able to, by increasing that surface area of the parts of the university that you as a student experience, you would then be able to burn those credits to get into hard-to-get-to sections like really choice times for really popular sections and that sort of thing. So some interesting ideas coming out of that as well. I guess back to entrepreneurship, my personal feeling is the next few decades of industry are going to see increasing success found in smaller, more entrepreneurial teams, both inside the larger organization as well as out in startups in the traditional environment of Silicon Valley and the other valleys that are popping up around the country. And I'd love to see gamification encourage collaboration. We talk a lot about individual achievement, but we in a lot of ways to support that. And I think things that help small teams grow and find time to execute on great ideas would be a really great thing to see.
Great, thanks, Matt. David?
Hi, my name is David Park. I'm the CEO of Beat the GMAT. We are the world's most active community for people who are studying for the GMAT entrance exam or applying to business school. And even before I talk about Beat the GMAT, my first experience with gamification education was learning to type, to touch type. I remember going back home as a college student, and my dad said, "You can't touch type." I said, "No." And I thought taking a typing class was really boring. But I took Mavis Beacon. I don't know if you remember Mavis Beacon teaches typing. You remember that? It's basically some program where this woman would make you do games, or you would race cars, or shoot down aliens, or whatever, by typing. And I remember being obsessed with my words per minute count, my accuracy count. And literally within like 3 weeks, I went from not knowing how to touch type at all to touch typing at 80 words per minute. And it was just insane. I would spend hours a day. So I'm a big believer in gamification, in helping education. So going back to our site, we are the biggest GMAT and MBA applicant community. And one of our biggest challenges has been so people come to our site to actually talk to each other, to ask questions about the GMAT, to learn from each other. So there are two big challenges we run into. One is, how do you incentivize experts to contribute, because they're really valuable. And second, how do you get people to find really useful content and share it with each other? Because we have about 3,000 articles today, or a little bit less than 3,000, but close to it, and almost 400,000 forum posts, a lot of which are really valuable. So the question is, how do you do that? And so we decided to try different experiments. And so last year, we started our whole gamification journey last January, so 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, January 2010, when we released a leaderboard where we would recognize experts for their contributions by giving them badges, having leaderboards. And all of a sudden, all the experts who are GMAT tutors or answering questions for free started flocking to our site, answering all these questions, because they had an incentive now because they were recognized as experts, which then led to more business for them. They were doing it for free, of course, to our users, but it was an incentivized system. The second thing we did is we saw a lift, just a lift in our site's usage and utilization. The second thing we did, we said, well, let's try to figure out how do you surface and identify really useful content. So we actually decided then to do a Facebook contest where we said, okay, we're going to find some really valuable articles, and we're going to have a contest where for about a month, we want people to find articles, read them, like them on Facebook, and share them. And that's what we did. We call it the treasure hunt, where basically we give out hints every day. People would look for these articles, and they'd find it, like it on Facebook, get some points for that. In some cases, if you liked an article, a pop quiz would pop up with multiple choice questions for that article. If you answer it correctly, you get mega points, and if you shared that, you get even more points. That was random, so you would never know which article had a question, and you could only do it once. So if you reload the page, you'd lose that quiz. So we gave a couple prizes, a couple pretty big prizes. But anyways, in that 1 month, we went from having maybe 100, 200 likes in the prior month on Facebook to having 20,000 likes. And there were people who were just liking and reading articles all the time, and they were taking notes on the articles to make sure they didn't miss a pop quiz. It was pretty insane. So we expected a lot of likes to happen because we were giving out some prizes. What we didn't expect, and we weren't sure what would happen, was that people loved the game itself. So we got lots of feedback from people saying, I didn't expect to win the prize because, just too many people are participating. There's thousands of people playing this game. However, I was still won at the end because I read so many great articles about the GMAT and business school, and now I feel much better prepared to get into business school. And so that was a huge learning from our perspective. And so since then, we've been applying gamification techniques in several different ways on our site, and we're still experimenting now.
Great, thanks, David. NT.
Okay, so my name is NT Etuk. My full name is Ntieto, and I get Nintendo quite a bit, which I guess is appropriate. I started a company and run a company called Dimension U, used to be called Tabula Digita. We create multiplayer educational video games that allow students to get on and play against each other, whether one's in London, one's in Seoul, Korea, and others in Chicago or Lagos, Nigeria, while they're learning curriculum, math, literacy, science, and history. We've taken in probably about $18 million in venture capital, including Pearson, thank you. And it's been going quite well. We're in about 1,500 schools across the country since we put our products out there in 2007, and have had independent university studies that have demonstrated 20% plus score improvements as a result of using the software. But the reason why I got involved and the reason why I think that gamification is so important. Oh, I'm sorry, one last thing. We're now expanding. We have a profitable school division. We're now expanding into the consumer side because we want to do that whole notion of Oregon Trail version 2.0 or 3.0, et cetera, just in a smarter way, if that makes sense. But the gamification aspect is really interesting because game programmers and video game programmers have actually figured out something the education system hasn't. If you watch a kid play a video game, a new video game, then what happens? They get on, they don't know anything about their environment, they don't know anything about their skills or their powers, they don't know anything about what the puzzles that they need to solve to get to the next level. They'll start, they'll play for 5 minutes, they'll fail, they'll start again. Play for 10 minutes, they'll fail, start again, play for 15 minutes. And they'll do that 10 times, 15 times, 100 times before they finally finish the game, succeed, and master it all. And so you ask the question, why can't that happen in chemistry or algebra? Why can't it happen in physics? And the answer is that it can. And the elements that we look at to sort of say, well, what's the contrast here? Look at what the kids did. They self-motivated themselves all the way through the game. What's the first thing that happens in the classroom when you have a problem? Raise your hand. What happens when the kids don't know how to do something on a video game? They ask their friends, they go out to the internet, they research things, they'll buy cheat books. Right? They'll go and they'll find the cheat codes. Everyone wants education for free. So we figured out on the gaming side how to get people to motivate themselves through essentially a learning process and to actually want to pay for it. But when you go to the school system, it's the complete opposite. And that's a disaster and an opportunity. So that's why gamification is important to us.
Great, thanks, NT. So the format for this is I'm going to ask a couple more questions, but I'm hoping that those of you in the audience, you all went to school, I assume, have a point of view or a question. So we'll open it up for leave time for questions at the end. So one of my questions to you guys, it's quite a variety of people we have on the panel. we know about the motivation factor. You know, games motivate, points motivate, badges motivate, you know, things that you can earn and prizes motivate. Is there something else about games that can that can enhance education? NT, you were sort of alluding to that in your comments, but my question is how far do we go in this with this idea of gamification? Is it just the badges? Is it just sort of, I mean, a lot of people will say school is a poorly designed game already. It gives grades and points, and you know, it has levels, and you know, but is that enough? Anybody want to respond?
Sure. Tell me if I talk too much. All right. So I actually break the different elements down into three components. I think there's psychological. I think that you could probably clump emotional into that as well, but I think I consider it separately. And then also the efficacy, which is the achievement element of it. And when I look at the psychological aspect, there is motivation. That's really, really important. But I think the three other elements that are very important with games is safety. So this is a safe environment to fail. Privacy. I can do this on my own, you know, and I don't have to put my hand up in the middle of the classroom and have everyone realize I don't know the question. And then personalization. So I think of that as a serious gamification element because you can actually control your environment inside most games, whether it's your character or whether it's choosing your maps or your levels, and none of that happens inside educational environments. So if you can help to personalize, then that's a psychological sort of help. Productivity, I actually think of this from the perspective of teachers. We say we have a labor shortage, and I say we do not have a labor shortage. The reason is because generally we consider the model one teacher to 20 or 30 students inside a classroom. But the truth of the matter is that actually, because you have multiple kids in the classroom, that kid might know conjugation, that kid might know fractions really well. If you take the combined knowledge of all the students in the classroom and you give them the incentive through points or whatever to actually help each other, then you might actually have 9 to 10 teachers in a classroom. That could reduce some of the pressure that we have on some of the teaching, et cetera. The last portion is emotion. And I don't know, how many of you know Anthony Robbins, Tony Robbins? You know that? Okay. Self-help guru, right? He says if you want to make permanent change in your life, you have to associate emotion with whatever change you want to make. So if you want to decrease your weight, then you take pain with the next bite, et cetera. We have no emotion when we get to education. Like the only emotion you have is, crap, I just got my text back and I didn't do really well, or I was really happy. And there's a huge amount of time between the emotional elements that you have, or the emotional experiences you have. Whereas in games, you have emotional experiences every 10, 15 seconds. And it doesn't let you get too depressed because you have a chance within the next 10, 15 seconds to build back up. So I think those are other elements.
Matt?
Yeah. Well, I like you're also kind of talking about collaboration there, the idea that taking sort of crowdsourcing the capabilities of the class to reinforce specialties and strength and knowledge there. I think also about what I like about game design or gamification is that it should be a flow state enabler, something that gets you back in that sense of, all right, I've got an achievement or something I can try to master here. It's going to take me a while to get back. I fall back to the bottom. I'm going to reapproach that and try again. And I guess maybe my strongest experience may not have been with Oregon Trail, but was with Microsoft Flight Simulator back when it was like 3 jaggy lines and 4 jaggy lines for the John Hancock Tower over there. And there was something engaging about that because I think it tied together it created a concrete, it was a simulation environment obviously, but it created a concrete place to apply abstract skills. There's some trigonometry over here, there's some reading and comprehension here, there's a little bit of hand-eye coordination over here. Bring them all together to give yourself an opportunity and environment to demonstrate mastery that would be virtually impossible to achieve in the real world. And finding more opportunities to sort of install flight simulators, if you will, into the more abstract aspects of learning would be something that I would love to see more of as well. And I don't know, I guess I look back at that particular experience, and I'm still using Flight Simulator today because here's the success story part. I became a pilot. Well, yeah. I actually did finally get my private pilot's license because I guess it's always been innate. But just having something like that allowed me to feel in that flow state and exercising a lot of this hard science and left brain and right brain side aspects of things I picked up in the classroom toward a goal that was just sort of very intrinsically motivating was hugely satisfying. I'd love to find a way to get back to that sort of thing.
Mike, did you want to add?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about quote unquote inverting the classroom. The idea that if you think back, so I work for a language learning company, so it's easy to imagine in a language learning environment. But imagine thinking back to your high school Spanish or French class, where your teacher stood up in front of the class and lectured in English about Spanish or French, and then sent you off to go practice, at home with paper worksheets or books or something. And so, the idea of inverting the classroom of if you can make software that's compelling enough, and games add to that, where the students are actually learning from the computer, the thing that you would have historically thought as the take-home exercise, the thing where you practice. But if you actually can learn from the computer, and then you can spend time practicing with the teacher, which is a much better use of the teacher's time, especially in language learning. If you can spend time speaking Spanish to your Spanish teacher, rather than talking about grammar of Spanish in English with your Spanish teacher, it's a much better use of their time and the student's time. But that expands out to other things too. Like I assume if you would go into Mr. Pai's classroom, what you'll see is he's able to concentrate on the kids who are having a problem. So if the kids are actually able to use games and in a way that's keeping them busy and learning, and then he's able to concentrate on the kids who are having the problems. That invert the classroom model, in addition to the scalability of other students who can help, but that invert the classroom model, I think, has a lot of promise, certainly for language learning, but lots of other areas also.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about with gaming is assessment, and especially the kinds of, we're sort of obsessed with assessment in education. It becomes, in fact, grades alone, grade point average alone has become high stakes. Just the grade point average you have is a high stakes measurement now. So we don't have a kind of a low stakes measurement tool that tells you what you can learn. And we don't have safe environments for failure, and we don't embrace community to let others around you do that. And I think games do all that. What is your view on sort of the role of assessment in gaming? Think about World of Warcraft and all that data that comes at you when you're playing, while you're playing, that enhances your experience.
We live in a community in California where they're piloting the Khan Academy in the schools. In fact, my daughter's a little bit too young right now to do that, but soon enough she'll go through that experience, I hope, as well. And I have a friend who works there, so I saw a demo of the Khan Academy and how they do assessment in real time, so that the teacher can look in a computer screen or a tablet and see how is each student doing at any given time in the day. And so the great thing about that is it is safe because it's not a test, not affecting your GPA. It helps us teachers zero in on students who are having more trouble and assist them in real time at the point in need, as opposed to waiting until the next pop quiz or next quiz happens where they actually get affected in their grades. And so the problem with the grades, I think, is that by the time you actually get your GPA, it's too late to actually do anything about it. And so you're better off trying to assess that need in real time, and if you can do that, it's even better. And I think that games and gamification and getting those results to come in helps you actually do that.
Anthony, were you going to add something?
Well, I'm a little intimidated. I don't know what a flow state enabler is. I don't really know assessment very well. So, I live on the dirt road most of the time. But, I was thinking in the base question on gamification, and, I reflected very quickly on a couple of people that I use in new businesses and entrepreneurial startups. And one is a guy named Jay that lives in New Jersey, dropped out of school. I don't even think he made it through high school. And he's a savant. I mean, the guy's brilliant. I can hit him with, a huge amount of data, and he'll come up with that morsel. And he's just brilliant at it. And I put him on a conference call, and he wouldn't know what a flow state enabler is or what assessment is, but he's learned just through his, self-taught on the computer almost any of these things, and he's natural with it. There's another one named John on the West Coast that I use. So I'm trying to frame that, and I keep feeling that in this gamification we're trying to isolate these buckets, right? And we're all real good at it. But there's something else there, and I'm not answering the question. I'm throwing something out to this distinguished panel that I just happened to land on. Yeah. Where does the savant fit into this, and how do we utilize these people of brilliance that really don't fit in the classroom today, anyway?
I was going to talk the assessment. I can talk.
Well,
to
no.
that
Let
as
me
well.
just. Would like to respond. I think that good teachers try to find that in every one of the children in their classroom, and the problem is that we put them all, in rows, and we have 30 of them. It's hard to personalize the learning, but great teachers find that emotional connection and connect it. And technology's had a hard time trying to power learning for some reason, to change the industry of learning. It's struggled for many years to become, integral, where every kid has a device, like we all have laptops when we go to work. And so I think the more you can personalize and the more you can focus, then that allows those guys are smart because they found something they were passionate about, and they studied it. You learned to fly because you wanted to learn to fly. The things that you are inspired about, nothing gets in your way in terms of what you need to learn to get there, because you're inspired. And that's probably one of the, I think, toughest challenges for teachers. But great teachers know how to do that, and it's clear from Mr. Pye.
So, partially, I guess, in answer to that question, I do think that and partially in answer to the question around assessment, there's a lot of data that can come in, particularly games around education, and that data can start to inform the types of lessons or the ways in which you present the lessons to students. One of the things that we do that we think is really powerful and will actually be seen more on our consumer side than in the schools, obviously from an assessment perspective, how proficient are you in fractions? How proficient are you in addition and subtraction or algebraic equations? We can do that very easily, but we actually think we can go deeper in terms of understanding from data what type of learner and what type of person you are. So our games are multiplayer, but a lot of people choose to do single player. If you're doing single player a lot and not doing multiplayer, you're either, I'll call it a loner learner or a social learner. And that can help in understanding how we should help you to get over obstacles that you have. In addition to that, we can actually measure the amount of time between the time that you start a problem and the time that you end a problem inside the game. Now, the point of the game is to actually win and to get the most points. People have two strategies around that. Some people go and get the points, get more points by actually taking the time to solve the problem. Others will potentially guess through and hope that they can get more. We can actually assess which one of those you're actually doing. As a result of all of this information, we can now come back and give your teacher, give your parent, and also give yourself deeper insight into you as a learner and a deeper assessment than just, do you know your material?
I'm going to switch out to the audience here, but you reminded me of one thing. If you don't know about Fold It from the University of Washington, you guys might want to look into that. This is Professor Zoran Popovic, who created a game to fold proteins and to prove that amateurs could do as well as scientists in folding proteins. And it's phenomenal. It's sort of this using data thing and being able to track individuals and where they fall off and where they're confused. It's some really incredible research. So if you don't know about it, you might want to do that. You might want to look into that. Do we have any questions out there? Those of you, anyone doing education and learning? In games and learning? Yeah.
Hi, I recently left a job with Apple to go back to education, and I'm currently pursuing a career as an elementary educator. My real question, though, is that all of these technological solutions that we've heard are great, but actually getting teachers to use them, I feel, can be a big stumbling block. Too often we see the teachers who just have no interest in going the extra mile. What sort of low impact, like solutions that are just very easily implementable without having to change entire systems can you envision, without having to roll out entirely new ways of things doing? Like, what little changes do you see that can make a big effect? That might be a very overarching question, but it's something that's near and dear to me.
Well, I have one quick response. I've seen some teachers who have just made up board games and paper games in their classroom to get at some content, just to sort of mix it up and have kids working. So it's not really about, gamification isn't always about technology. So that might be one answer. Do you guys have any comments?
I think that, I think that's a common problem. I mean, I think if you go out and see, there's lots of shelfware out there that people have spent lots of money on that the teachers never use. It just sits there. I think it hadn't dawned on me until you just asked the question, but maybe that's a good place for gamification. I mean, maybe there's a place where schools can figure out how to use gamification at the macro level, not in the classroom, but to get teachers, to embrace the new techniques. There's some areas that I think teachers are very quick to embrace new things because they have to. Computing is a good example, where for the most part, even though it feels dated to some of us, it's advanced a lot since the early 1980s when I took those same computing classes. Oh yeah, I'm 20. I guess I couldn't have done that. But there's other places where you can't do that, right? I mean, the foreign language or English, or lots of places that hasn't advanced much at all from when we took those same classes. And so I think what you've just described, I think, is a big problem, which is how do you get? I think some people think teachers are the answer, that you can find great teachers. I think figuring out how to get that scalable across hundreds of thousands of teachers is a real problem, and maybe it is something that you guys out there could figure out how to gamify and help.
It's also a problem that we're set up in such a way that your teacher is put in a certain setting that doesn't really embrace some of this. If everyone had an enabled device that you could build multiplayer educational software on, and you could get training around it, it'd be easier to do, but it's a difficult setting that hasn't changed much for hundreds of years. So it's not only the teachers, it's sort of the system.
Could I answer the question on the scalable front? Let me make one observation. First of all, the average age of a game player is 34 years old. So the average teacher coming out of college these days is actually very used to this technology. The teacher is not necessarily the problem. The problem is the principal and the older administrators who don't even understand why their kids or grandkids spend 3 hours a day on these machines. So that's one of the big problems. But I actually think that the solution, this is the way that we've viewed it, is the sort of crossing the chasm, the book Crossing the Chasm. You have your innovators and early adopters, and you have your general sort of mainstream. We've probably hit the innovators and early adopters. We're moving into sort of the general mainstream. At that point in time, from my perspective, you've gone as far as you need to go inside the school system. You need to break out beyond that. And we've been looking at, we started in the schools, but why we're going to the consumer side is because that's actually where the real user, who is the kid, is not impeded by the teacher. So when we put it inside a classroom, we found that 25 to 30% of the kids would go home without prompting and play these games at home on their own. What we also found was that if you had 100 kids in a school, by the time you got to the end of the school year, you'd have 1,000, 10 times growth rate, because they were passing it to each other. So in other words, now what started to happen as a result of that, Chicago's Board of Education came back, and they were like, they heard about this, they're like, why aren't we using this in the schools? So I think that the way that you actually create that massive change in the school system, because teachers are well-meaning, but they have a lot of pressure on their time, et cetera, is you actually create a grassroots movement among the students, which really has to happen outside of the school environment, and that'll put more pressure on the schools itself to change. That's one solution. That's how we look at it.
Matt, were you going to jump in? No?
No.
I was just going to say that we did 1,000 school tests for recycling this last year with Pepsi, a program called Recycle Rally. And it wasn't the schools or the teachers, even though we gave $100,000 away in prizes, in actual cash prizes for the school. It was an outside influencer, and it was someone that heard about the potential program and then pushed the school to do it, because the school didn't want to do it. So a lot of times I think if you can get the influencers, whether it's the PTA or whoever it may be, you're going to find an activist for this, and they seem to have a louder voice, or at least that's our experience in these recycling programs at schools.
Change agents.
Yes.
Yeah. Another question? Yeah. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so there's two kinds of instruction. There's whole class instruction, which is a perfect example of, I mean, you could play Flower Power that Mr. Pai showed there with one of those students with the whole class just by facilitating it, and I think teachers are probably doing that. So yes, because it's a common platform that you can all play together, like we could play a game together. But it's not the only thing, I think. But it definitely, I would say, it's a platform that works. Is your
yeah, so I actually know Nancy, who started Smart and who runs it, and she would love for that to actually happen. They're probably in about 1 million, they're sort of close with their numbers, but 1 million classrooms, so 30 million kids. And I think that the idea that if you could create like a game that could use like the clickers, you could play against each other and all the rest, that there are conversations, that we've had around that sort of thing, and I think it would be absolutely phenomenal.
And all all those interactive whiteboard companies are now investing in, also you can go on the web, and so it's really just one big computer screen in the classroom, which is not unlike what's happening at home with the Kinect and the Xbox and the Wii and the family sitting around. And I think you'll see a lot of change around home learning because of that kind of big screen experience that is a shared collaborative, in-person collaborative experience. So that's a very good point. Another question? Yeah, you in the back.
Hi, my name is Nathan, and I write for KQED, and I'm really interested in how games and curriculum integrate together, because I think that a lot of games can focus on some little niche in a curricular element, but then I'm really trying to figure out, I'm writing an article right now actually trying to figure out how can you look at all different curriculums and figure out what points of them are right for a game and what points aren't. And I don't know if any of you guys have any response to that.
I'm sorry, what points are right for a game?
So if I understand it, how can, really, are games good for every part of the curriculum or just some parts of the curriculum, and how do we reconcile that?
Then the follow-up with that would be, what courses or curriculums do you think games aren't good for?
So I think one of the, if you went out and looked at all sort of, games that are out there in the education space right now, I think you'll see some that are truly innovative, where people have sort of changed the way that you learn with the game. But I think that's the small percentage. The vast majority are sort of, they've taken something that, something that we would have done on flashcards or on paper or in a workbook, for years and years, and they sort of just turn it into a game because it's been easy. I think the real opportunity for games and for gamification in the classroom is for true innovation, where people say, look, how could we teach this in a way that you couldn't have done on paper, right? That you couldn't have done in 1918, that we could do today in 2011 or 12 or whenever it would come out, because we have the power of technology. And I think it's that I think is the great opportunity. So in some ways, let's not limit at all what curriculums and what areas you could use, because somebody out there who's going to spend the time and to innovate. And so the guy who came up with Rosetta Stone, the idea in the late 1980s when he had it of teaching language with a computer with no translation. You never hear the language you know. You never hear English. You only see and hear French, and I will teach you. People laughed. When he walked into schools, people literally laughed and said, you can't do that. You've got to do translation. The kid's 11 years old. He can't learn French without translation. And now it's common. People realize, okay, it works. You can do it. We're in almost 15,000 schools. So, and if he had sort of thought, it's too hard. We should just translate the textbook or just translate the way we've been teaching. It wouldn't have happened. So, I think almost anything is right with the right level of innovation.
So, I'd like to take a shot at your question also. I think that on the consumer side, there's the opportunity to do a lot more than there is on the school side. And one of the reasons for that is because our games are actually one of those sort of bottom feeders that just put multiple choice questions. But the reason why we actually did that was not our choice. Our first games that we put out actually said that if you wanted to teach how to figure out the way to move around a circle, then let's run around the game in a circle, and we'll actually give you a visceral feel for what it is. So when we taught the coordinate system, we said, okay, here's a coordinate system, x, y coordinate up at the top. You're in a 3D environment. When you move to 3, 3 on your grid in the 3D world, your point moved to 3, 3 up top. Completely innovative, very immersive, gave them a visceral feel for what you need. You know who hated it? Teachers. Teachers hated it. And the reason why teachers hated it was because they didn't see an equation. In addition to that, they didn't like it because they said, that takes too much time. If they're taking 2 minutes to get to that point, on a worksheet, I could have done that in 30 seconds. So we actually had to dial back and gamify or put more of the game there and still do the multiple choice questions because it wouldn't turn off the kids, but it could still get past the teachers. That's one of the reasons why we're going out to the consumer side, because that's what you can do. So right now we have multiple choice questions for math. I think that you can get into different types of things with games like Civilization, where you can teach history, you can teach greater forms of or longer forms of reading and all that. I think that you can actually do a lot of that. I think that the ideal solution is not to try to figure out, though, how you do the full instructional component inside a game, because that's too specific, but how you can actually go out to, at points where there's a teachable moment, to something like Khan Academy, and then come back into the games.
I think it's a mistake to try to gamify the whole thing. I think you have to look at the ecosystem. The teacher's a member of that system. The book is a member of that system. Technology is, and each of those pieces do a good job at certain things and do a bad job at other things. And so I think it's hard unless you can connect everybody up into a virtual network, which you can at home potentially. I think it's pretty hard. One other thought is around storytelling, because I think great games are great stories. A lot of the games, the AAA games now, are incredible stories, and that's a part of a literacy now that's coming forward that I think is important. But I think some of that's hard to teach with games. We have time for one more question, then we have to wrap it up, I'm afraid. Anybody? Yeah. So the question is, how do you add the ability to address nonverbal communication, which is a big part of effective communication? Any thoughts?
I'd go back to the spelling bee to start. 1925. It's a great game, but I think you've got to start. You've got to start there. I mean, I don't know how you move beyond without starting in one place. And so I think it's a really difficult proposition. I mean, I have that challenge interviewing people, just sizing them up versus listening to how articulate they are. Mm-hmm. And I think you got to start with the words. Yeah,
I think even in business, when you use technology to communicate, if you're sending emails and you're meeting someone for the first time, when I meet someone for the first time, I like to go face to face, have a connection with them that includes that nonverbal piece. So then your nonverbal communication is more effective after that. So that's probably something there that back to, it's not going to be all or nothing. It's going to be a blend probably that includes the human aspect probably. Any other thoughts?
But I think it's great that he brings it up, because I'm old school. I feel like we've lost a lot of that. And so, if there is a way with gamification to bring some of that back into the equation, I think it'd be wonderful. I don't have the answer, but I do think we're missing that today.
Yeah, my mom didn't let me send her emails. She wanted a real letter from me.
In Second Life, they actually did that. It was kind of funny. The first thing that I saw about Second Life, when everyone was like, "Is Second Life going to be great for learning?" If you notice what happens in Second Life when you don't move very often, or when you don't move, then your person starts to nod off. So the first things that were happening in learning environments was people would just put up a lecture. You have people come into this auditorium, and because they didn't move, everyone fell asleep. I was like, well, that's a classroom. There we go.
Well, thanks very much, you guys. NT, Mike, Matt, Anthony, David, really a pleasure to meet all of you and to hear about what you're doing, and I really appreciate the time, and thanks you guys for the attention.